ventilation has been improved. It got rather warm here. Since I was running this battery so hard, I was charging it at 100 amps all night long after discharging it for at over 100 amps. It got very warm, well, not very warm, but when I stuck the thermal camera down between the cells, so it was almost 40 degrees, it was like 37 or something, which I'm not really fine with. In hindsight, perhaps I should have taken some more care to space the cells out a bit, but I don't think it's going to be an issue in the long run. Yeah, capacitor test is a rather extreme scenario, especially with these cells that are barely commissioned yet, so I would expect them to run a bit warm. But yeah, we've got some extra fans there, we've got the big blower there, which is putting a huge vacuum in this room, so there's just a shit ton of airflow right now, and it's nice and chill in here. So I was initially not going to do another cycle today, but I think we're going to do that with Bank 2 regardless, because it's been sitting for a while. I took the balance charges off this morning, and the cells were in decent condition. They'd all gone up to voltage, and the current had dropped down. And I put some charge on it, and it's still rather uneven all over. To really get most capacity out of it, I should let it charge for about a day, just sucking low current in. It's going to set at an amp or two. But since we get so uneven voltages, we have some cells going up to about 2.5 volts. I think it's going to be happier if we do another cycle on it before we really start caring too much about balance. I don't think these batteries have a single cycle on them, and so they've not ever been properly formed. That would be my theory, and that would explain why we have such uneven cell voltages on them. Especially since the capacity, at least in this one, seems to be fine anyway. So we're going to do a cycle. It's a bit ugly all over because we actually have a bit of sunlight right now. It's pulling about 500 watts from the panels at 500 volts. And we're going to have to break that. There's no way to remove the load from this without turning the inverter off, which I don't want to do. So this poor solar switch is going to have to break about an amp. But hopefully it's going to survive. It's not something we do every day. Well, last few days I guess we have. But yeah, I have been messing around with the inverter some more. I've decided to go the babysitter route as far as monitoring this goes, because in order to avoid the early cutoff, as we've been getting every time thus far, I've set the minimum battery voltage to 42 volts, which is as low as it'll go, and 40 volts on the if I yank the power cord, which is also as low as it'll go. So hopefully it's going to be able to run the battery down to 43 volts at the terminals this time, without cutting the test before it's actually finished. So there's not really much more left to do. I'm kind of waiting for the clock to strike 20 even, so it'll be easy to count the time in my head as the test is progressing. Yeah, I'm going to run outside, hook the car on charge at 10 amps, put a 2 kilowatt space heater just blowing into the wind, pissing away energy, and then we'll hopefully be at about 5 kilowatts. Load again, and we'll be ready to see if this guy can do more than 200 amperes this time. Alright, and there we go. Discharging at about 110 amps. It's going to fluctuate some, but if we're between 100 and 120, I'm happy. So now I'm just going to remote to this thing from a server, keep an eye on it for hopefully a few hours rather than 2 hours. We're starting at exactly 8 o'clock, so it's going to be easy doing all the maths, and I'm going to run it down here once every half hour and use my little probe adapter to stab all of the cells and see that we have no outliers. So here we go. And it's now just past 10. We've been running for 2 hours 10 minutes, and as you can see, we have aborted the test for one particular reason, and that is this cell. Number 5. I was going about my business down here doing various work, and the timer went off. I went to check each and every cell voltage, and cell number 5 was at 1.27 volts. Well, I got 1.34 when I noted it, and 1.27 when I shut the test off. So number 5 is not doing too well. There's something wrong there. I doesn't feel warmer than the others. So we're going to have to pay some attention to that. I don't think cell number 5 was one of the ones that was getting extra charge, and none of the ones which were getting extra charge were in any way bottlenecking here. Yeah, I'm gonna let this pack cool off for a while. It's probably somewhat warm, and then we're gonna charge it up at a more reasonable current than I did the other one. 100 amps is not too much for this uncooled configuration, and we'll go from there. But yeah, that guy is our bottleneck right now, and actually a couple of others, cells 8 and 9 and 14 and 17 were also below the threshold voltage. The specification for maximum cell voltage deviation is 0.2 volts, negative 0.2 volts at the end of a discharge. So we're going for 1.83 volts per cell discharge. So these guys were not quite at the lower threshold yet, but they were getting there. They were dropping off quite quickly as well. But yeah, cell number 5 is our main concern by far. So I'm going to pay some extra attention to those cells and give this pack a proper charge. See if cell 5 just has a lower stated charge than the others, or if it's actually failed somehow. It is actually one of the better looking cells. If we look at, for instance, cell number 4, which was performing just fine, you can see the positive cap there has risen up high enough for you to see the O-ring due to positive plate growth, which is an age issue with lead acids. But cell number 5 has significantly less positive plate growth, and why that is, I have no idea. Perhaps it's historically been sitting at a lower voltage for some reason. It just hasn't been charged as much. Who knows, but we are sure to find out, and that is a 200 amp hour cell in a 750 amp hour pack. It needs some work. Okay, I've left the battery rest for about an hour. I checked some cell voltages and just now turned on about a 50-ish amp charge to bring these back to full charge over time. And I measured all the cell voltages after the cycle was complete. I let it settle for 10 minutes or so, and pretty much all the cells were sitting at between 2.04 and 2.06 volts, except for cell 5, which was at about 2.01. So cell 5 was at a lower stated charge than the others. Also, if we check the cell voltages now that we're charging the battery, they're going to be a bit higher than the resting voltage. So we have 2.20 on number 17, 2.19 on number 6, and number 5, 2.20. We can also see 2.19. The difference was a bit greater a couple of minutes ago, but cell 5 seems to be leading the voltage of the entire pack. Most of them are 2.19 with very small margins, while number 5 is above 2.2. So we can conclude that cell 5 has a higher resistance than the others, and it was discharged to a lower stated charge. So it has less capacity and higher resistance, which is bad. I wouldn't be so concerned if it was only high resistance, but I think it's also got low capacity even at lower load. So yeah, that could be bad. It could be a broken plate or something. That's really uncommon for Sun and Shine batteries, or OPzV batteries in general. They are very mechanically durable. It's part of why they're so attractive. while I was working and doing the cycle on battery number 2, I also took the time to space battery 1 out a bit to deal with the thermal problems, because when it was just packed tightly together, the central cells were just running way too hot, and I've now loosened all the bolts, and I've moved all the cells so that they're all standing with an air gap between, and I can move every single cell on its own. The outer row here has massive air gaps to allow air to move in, so you can see they're all standing freely. It's an ugly solution. It looks terrible. They're quite tightly squeezed up against the outer wall, but the outermost cells are going to get the best cooling anyway, so it's not a big concern. And I can actually feel heat just streaming up from in here. When I checked with the thermal camera, the central cells were still at over 30 degrees in the center, and they have been sitting for an entire day and more. If we bring the camera out, it's like looking into some form of nuclear reactor with all the heat just streaming up from the center there, with really temperatures still in the 30s down below the cells. It's streaming so much you can see it actually heating up the cross member there right above the air gaps. So yeah, this battery, I should have had the foresight to give it better cooling. I was kind of expecting this, but not to this extent. Okay, the cycling continues, and more magic has been discovered with the lime green box. So for starters, we're cycling bank number 2 here once again. I have kept both banks on a balanced charge for about 16 to 18 hours. They've been sitting at 2.4 volts per cell, soaking the current up. And I've periodically been doing notes about the cell voltages, and I have been hooking up these 2 power supplies as balanced charges when necessary. So I've been doing that on bank 2 for quite a while, until it was doing pretty okay, and the cell voltages were almost in spec. I was quite happy with it. We have, I think, cells 4 and 6 or something were sitting a bit low, so they got to soak up a bit of extra juice, and they came up to voltage spec. And when that happened, I decided to do another cycle. The specification for the batteries is that before doing a cycle, you should do either a 72-hour 2.25 volts per cell charge, or a 16-hour 2.4 volts per cell charge, followed by an 8-hour 54 volts or 2.25 volts per cell charge. I've skipped the float charge because they were just not drawing any current, and that bank just needs more cycling anyway before we can really get good capacity out of it, due to cell number 5 being weak. So tomorrow we're going to be doing another cycle on this guy, because then it's going to be soaked up as well. On it we have, let's see, cell 2 is a really power hungry one, drawing over an amp now. Cell 22 is the second most power hungry, and the cell 16 is drawing like half an amp from this guy. They're all sitting at about 2.4 volts, slightly under. So we have 3 cells that are a bit more power hungry than the others. Hopefully they're just a bit less charged, but yeah, cell 16 still has me worried due to how ugly it is. Something's been going on there. But yeah, that's not to worry, because I've found out a very neat trick with the inverter. So today I actually got certified to be putting power out onto the grid. So I've been running my solar panels at full power all day, and it's working beautifully. But that gives me some more flexibility in how I run the system. And I was digging through the settings today, and I noticed max battery discharge current in hybrid mode, and that sets a maximum discharge current when grid and solar are available, which means that by tweaking that value and keeping solar connected, keeping grid connected, and just turning the charge source for batteries off and power supply priority to battery first, I can do a very controlled current discharge while everything's hooked up. I don't need to turn the solar off, as long as we're sinking enough power to overwhelm the solar. So it's a bit cloudy today and it's quite late, so we're not putting out a huge deal. We're putting out usually about 500 watts of solar right now. So we have 500 watts we need to sink in something, and anything over that is going to come from the batteries. And since I have my actual grid feed paperwork done now, we don't have the 400 watt grid overhead to deal with as we had before, because this thing can sit even feeding back into the grid if necessary, or it can keep at a basically zero load level compared to the grid, whereas previously it would have to pull some current from the grid in order to definitely not feed back. So if I would have used this technique previously, I would have had to sink first the solar power, then another 400 watts from the grid, and over that I'd have to sink anything I can get into the battery. But now we just basically need to overpower the solar and sink the battery, and by adjusting the maximum discharge current, we can get a very even discharge current. As you can see, we're sitting rock solid at 113.2 amps there, just because I've got the car on charge, I've got some stuff running, a couple of heaters outdoors, so we're just definitely using enough power, and the inverter is current limiting the discharge, which is going to be extremely good for calculating capacity. So yeah, that's a super neat trick. I'm super happy I noticed that parameter in the manual. So yeah, we're going to let this discharge now, going to let this guy keep soaking up some current, and I'll get back to you. Bank 1 is done. I just pulled another cycle on this. Didn't film any of it because, well, it's getting a bit repetitive by now. And I've borrowed a data interface for my BM869, and I kept very careful check on each cell voltage. I probed them every half hour, and they were all very symmetrical and nice under load. The only remaining issue with this bank is cell number 2 seems to float at a bit of a low voltage, so I'm going to keep balance charging it for a while. It's getting better all the time. I think it's just maybe got a bit more capacity than the others, so it's taking a bit extra to get up to charge. I think that's going to turn out fine, and capacity for the entire bank at 110-ish amps load comes out to about 85% of new capacity if we go by the datasheet. They can run 110 amps for about 4.5 hours, in that region. 4.36 hours is the particular data I got, and that's on the current that's specified for a 5-hour runtime. So it's not anywhere near as good as I expected. These cells are in worse condition than I initially thought, so I'm disappointed, given that those guys over there, 6-volt blocks, they're in similar condition, but they are 4 years older and much more abused. So why those are better than these guys, I have no clue. Perhaps these have been sitting in a really hot server hall or something like that. Although, something I have noticed, these have reasonably high internal resistance. They run quite warm under charging, and I tried charging them at 130 amps, and they more or less overheat, even when these cells are specified for unlimited charging current because they're self-limiting. But I had to fan cool them for, that kind of charge, and even then they started overheating, so I had to drop the level off. So I'm still carrying a bit of hope that over time, when they get a few cycles on them, the internal impedance, the internal resistance is going to kind of drop down a bit. And since they also have a reasonably high internal resistance, they are going to have more capacity at a lower load. Keeping in mind, 112 amps is 5 kilowatts for one of the banks. That's a lot of load, and they are never going to see that sort of load in actual service. I'm going to limit the current to something like 50 amps across both banks. So they're going to see like 25 to 40 amps load in daily service, giving us a lot more usable capacity. I'd expect them to be over 90% if we were to run a test at a much lower current. So all in all, not too bad. They're definitely serviceable. I don't mind. I can run these batteries without feeling bad about it. Although something I have figured out is the capacity rating they have stamped on the side, 748 amp hours. That's a rating that only exists on the label for the batteries. It doesn't exist in the datasheet, it doesn't exist in any specification. I have no clue why they say 748 amp hours. They are 600 amp hours. Yeah, the datasheet does not agree with the label, and that seems to be the case for all of these. I really have no clue what Sun and Shine are doing. Oh well. It doesn't really matter. We know to follow the datasheet rather than the label, and we have an 85% battery under heavy load, probably 90-95% under low load, so no problems at all with that. So I'm just going to allow cell number 2 to balance charge for a bit. You can see we have it on channel 1 there. It's drawing about an amp while the rest of the bank is drawing almost nothing. And I'm going to let this sit for a while, and then I think I'm just going to take this bank into service and start using it. We're still working on bank number 2 here. You can see cell number 5 there is receiving quite a bit of attention. We're discharging that, giving it a few cycles since it's underperforming. But yeah, once if we can get cell 5 under control there, I think we can get pretty decent performance out of both of these banks. Cell 5 has been showing steady improvements, gaining about 10 amp hours every charge-discharge cycle. So a few more cycles, I think we can get this bank up to maybe 400 amp hours or so, with cell 5 being the limiting factor. So we're going to end up with something like, about 1,000 amp hours worth of battery, just under, at high load. Again, this bank also has high internal resistance, so at the lower loads we're going to be seeing in real operation, it's going to perform better. So I would say we have 1,000 amp hours usable maximum capacity in normal operation, and something like that is going to be what I base my charge level numbers on, like my cycle count numbers on when I set the system to use, when I determine all the long-term current limits and so forth for the inverter. But yeah, bank 1, pretty much ready to go. Sweet. Alright, the time has come to cycle bank number 2. It's been sitting on a float charge for a couple of days, and it's really dropped down to a super low level, and I've been keeping an eye on the infamous cell 5, and its voltage has been really good. So I'm going to take a couple of data points on the cell voltages before we start, and then I'm going to go flip a couple of breakers and put the car on charge, put a few heating fans outside, and we'll see how good this bank is going to be. So I think the last result was 313 amp hours. I'm expecting a lot more than that. And there we are, up and running. 112 amps, or, well, 180 according to inverter, but, we'll go with a clamp meter. So I've just started gathering some data. I took first I measured all the cell voltages under a 54 volts float charge, and then I just did the first measurement under load, and we're all performing quite well during the first few minutes. No obvious outliers, but we aren't expecting that anyway. So hopefully we're going to be going for over 400 amp hours. That's, fingers crossed. It's a bit of an optimistic estimation because a couple of the cells over here were a bit sad, but let's just say optimistic. 400, that's our goal. We know that cell 5 can do 400, no problem. and that was the issue before. The test is about to end. We have one cell number 9 is doing a bit wonky, and the specification for minimum voltage under a discharge test is final voltage per cell minus 0.2 volts. That means since I'm running a cycle down to 1.83 volts per cell, my minimum cell voltage is 1.63, and that means this test is over. Cell 9 needs some attention. The results are in. 302 amp hours. Not where we want to be, not where I hope to be. However, it is good in the sense that we really are only held back by another single cell that's acting up, cell number 9. The rest of them seem to be doing quite okay. They would have had a fair bit more to give. And the last cycle we did on this thing was 250 amp hours, as limited by cell number 5, which is now the strongest cell in the entire pack, which is, good. That means we've successfully recovered cell number 5, and assuredly there's still hope for cell number 9 and any others that might be trying to follow in its track and being a bit weak. So I just did a voltage test. The pack has been resting for half an hour after the test with like an amp of load or something, and what we can tell from this is how deeply discharged the cells are, because the higher the open circuit voltage, the more energy is still left in the cell. So we can see that cell number 1 there was at 2.02 volts, while cell number 2 was at 2.04. So cell number 2 is less deeply discharged than cell number 1. And if we go down to cell number 9, we can see it's absolutely the lowest one, sitting at 2.006. So cell number 9 is quite deeply discharged. It just doesn't have a lot of capacity to come with. It's not just a question of it having a high internal resistance, because if the only issue with cell number 9 was a high internal resistance, it would just be unable to put out its capacity and it would recover to a higher voltage. But that's not the case, as cell number 9 has low capacity. All the other cells are pretty reasonable. We have a couple of outliers. Cell number 14 there was performing poorly all the way throughout the test, and it's resting at a rather low voltage as well. But that's really the only one I've actually taken in note of. I can see cell 8 and 9 there together have been kind of weak as well. 8 had a lower general voltage as we were moving through the test, but it wasn't dropping off like a rock, like cell number 9 did. So now I'm just going to recharge this, and do you think we dare just flick the breaker to that thing? There really shouldn't be too much of a voltage difference between these. We have 49 volts open circuit voltage on the pack under test, so we really shouldn't see too much of a current spike if we just turn on both battery breakers and charge directly pack to pack. We'll see what happens, just for the hell of it. So we're under a 3 amp idle load. Let's turn on battery bank number 1. Oh, we're cross-feeding about 40 amps there. That's going to drop like a rock. But yeah, more cycles to come. I think we'll probably charge this bank up and give the cell number 9 a bit of special treatment with a water bucket like we did with cell number 5, and we'll give them from there. Perhaps we'll gain another 50 amp hours out of doing that. Cell 9 received some attention and things are looking good. So the last cycle was about 303 amp hours. The following cycle was 356, and that's a 53 amp hour gain, or a roughly 9.5% gain when referencing the total the rated pack capacity. And that's really, really good. That's exceeding my expectations for a single cycle. So that means cell 9 is coming along. It's doing well, and it's allowed us to find more weak cells in this thing. it really seems that pack number 2 got the short straw as far as the cell quality goes, because I have some more data here. So this is the final voltage data for the last cycle, and I've sorted this by final voltage when I ended the test. You can see we have cell 21 was actually below cell 9, and cell 6, 17 and 8, relay 14 and 1 as well, were all below our threshold voltage of 1.83 volts per cell. In fact, we don't get to the threshold voltage 1.83 volts until we're at cell number what's that going to be, 14 here on row 5, no, cell number 13 on row 14. So these cells really are not doing as well as pack number 1 at all. So what I've done to remedy this is I've targeted charging. I first started by charging the whole pack at a rather high voltage, 58.8 volts, and for a few hours, letting it just soak up for all the cells. And then I've targeted the weakest few, which would be 21, 9, 6 and 17. Maybe I did 8 as well, I don't quite remember. But I've just given them an extra 4 hour 4 to 5 amp charge, where I've just been allowed to soak up a bit more capacity, since we learned from doing cell number 5 that overcharging the cell in a controlled manner really does do a lot when it comes to recovering capacity. So hopefully we're going to see better results. Since we ran for 3 hours 18 minutes, I believe, or it was 3.18 hours to get to our, no, it was about 3.5 hours to get to our 350 amp hours. So I'm hoping to get a probably similar result, but it's going to take longer to get there, and perhaps we'll see some shuffling around in this end here, where the kind of middle weak cells get to the ones that we gave the extra charge to have moved up the ranks a bit, and a couple of others have slid into their place. I'm expecting cell 21 and 9 here to still be competing for the worst performing spot. Might be joined by cell number 6, and well, cell number 17 is not far behind either, but those have received the most brutal treatment. So I'm just emptied the car battery. I've got plenty of room in there to dump energy into, so I'm gonna start another cycle. Thankfully it's overcast today, so we have 400 watts of solar coming in, so we're not even having to waste a lot of solar power. There's been so much time since the last time I filmed this. The inverter has grown to PC, but there has been things going on. I've cycled this bank number 2 quite a few times. In fact, we are up to 8 cycles, and there's a very positive trend going. So I have been doing various things to the bank to get the performance to improve. I don't recall when the last time I filmed was, but things have definitely been going better, and I've graphed everything out. So when we started working with this bank, we had 234 amp hours, and now we've almost doubled that. We're at 420, and I was not expecting this to go this well. And we're going to be doing a cycle tonight. I think it's going to be the final one. So our total capacity is 75% of the rated capacity for these cells at 112 amps of discharge current. And really, if we can get over 80, I'm happy, and I'm going to stop cycling that cell. Even if we get to just under 80, I'm going to be fine with that. But I think we're going to breach 80 because I've been doing a lot of targeted charging on these. So I've monitored the cell voltages during the discharge, especially at the end of the discharge, and all the weakest cells, I've listed them here on my cheat sheet for the weakest cell of the last cycle, on all of these I've given them extra charging. I've done these a 6.6 amp 4-hour charge on each of these cells, one by one. And I think on the 3 worst ones or 2 worst ones I did that twice with a few days in between. So the weakest cells have gotten the most charging, the good cells have not been touched, so they have not been subjected to undue damage. Yeah, I'm just about to put the car on charge, put on the load, and let this run out for what's hopefully going to be the last time. So fingers crossed for over 80% capacity. We are roughly 3 hours 30 minutes into the cycle, and we have one cell sticking out weaker than the others, and that would be cell number 6 here, a previous culprit. It's just received 2 high voltage charges. I don't think it's going to get much better than this. So this cycle I really think is going to be it, and cell 6 is going to be our limiting factor. So I just checked all the cell voltages, and they're generally pretty good. You can see the voltage in that column there, and most of them, pretty much all of them, are over 1.83 volts, which is our cutoff voltage. Most are like 8.7, 8.6, 8.8. One there, so 21 at 1.84, but that's just fine compared to cell number 6 there, which we're measuring live. They're doing perfectly fine, and they have a lot of capacity still to spare. So we're basically just now in the final minutes of a test. The last cycle, the 420 ampere cycle, took 3 hours 45 minutes to complete. So it's going to be very interesting to see how far we're going to get, and for what criteria I have to cut the cycle. Last time I actually did not reach the minimum cell voltage for any of the cells. I shut the cycle off due to average cell voltage. We got to below 43.8 volts there, which is our cutoff. So it's going to be interesting. I think we're going to be cutting because cell 6 is going to fall below 1.63 volts. But the upcoming 30 minutes are probably going to show. It's very close. I just did the final voltage measurement at 20 past midnight, and we are terminating based on total pack voltage. Should have terminated at 43.8 there, that's including the jumper. Losses, that's what our average cell voltage is going to be 1.83 volts, and since cell number 6 is dropping out so quickly, pushing this any further is not going to give us a whole lot. You can see where, let's see the numbers count down, no point making these batteries suffer more than they need to, so we will just flick that to grid and apply. Now the fan should shut up, and we are no longer loading the system down. So I'm going to extract the data, and we'll see how it performed. It's not going to be as much better as I had hoped, because the timer, well, we're at 3 minutes before half an hour, so we did like almost, we did pretty much 4 hours instead of 3 hours and something. So it is an improvement. Might be up to 80%, but I don't think so. We'll see. 443 amperes. 79%. We almost made it, but not quite. And this is cycle number 9, and it's the final cycle of bank number 2. I'm sad we didn't get past 80%, but this is going to be the final cycle. If we were to do another, we would reach 80%, no doubt about it. Cell 6 has been improving all along. and we know that the capacity of cell 5 used to be 422, so these cells in general are gonna have more than 420 in them. It's just that it needs to be coaxed out. But in normal use, these are going to be cycled slightly anyway, and I think they're going to slowly move out of this rut they're in with some time in use. So, we're ready to just, for first time, go into proper live operation. That's battery number 1. We now have both battery banks hooked up. So all that's left to do is turn them on. PV, battery grid, battery grid. Apply that. And we are now running off of both batteries. It's still light outside, so it's charging at 34 amps. But yeah, as soon as the sun sets, we're going to be running off of our, what's this going to be, roughly 1000 amp hours effective 5-hour rate bank. That's not too bad. 80% capacity, bit over if we average both banks out. And that's not too bad considering the price of each bank is €32.50. Thank you for watching. Cheerio.